Anna Caldwell stood in the auction dust with her late husband's pocket watch clutched so tight it cut into her palm, and she raised her hand anyway. 19 starving bison, condemned to the slaughter pen. The auctioneer laughed. The whole town laughed. But Anna didn't flinch, not when the banker who wanted her ranch smiled like he'd already won, not when her neighbors turned their backs on her. She spent her last silver dollar on animals nobody wanted, on a dream nobody believed in, and she said the words that would change Cedar Fork Valley forever. These bison aren't dying on my watch. Before we begin, if stories of broken women finding unbreakable strength speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our family right here. And I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city down in the comments below so I can see just how far this story has traveled by the time it's done. Now let's begin. The gavel came down 3 times before anybody understood what Anna Caldwell had just done. Sold, the auctioneer said, squinting at her like she'd sprouted a second head. To the Caldwell widow, 19 head condemned stock for $11. Silence spread through the yard like spilled water. Then someone laughed a short, ugly bark from the back of the crowd, and it broke the dam. Men who'd been standing with their thumbs in their belts started grinning at each other. A woman near the fence covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. Anna kept her chin level. She walked toward the pen where the condemned bison stood, pressed together, ribs showing through matted hide, eyes rimmed white with fear, and she didn't look back at the laughter behind her. $11, a voice said close to her ear. Anna, that was every cent you had left. She didn't need to turn to know it was Hank Raleigh. She'd known that voice since she was a girl, since before Thomas, since before any of this went wrong. I know what it was, Hank. Then you know you just bought a death sentence with a heartbeat attached to it. He stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. His hat was pushed back, and underneath it, his face had the particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent 30 years watching other men's mistakes cost him sleep. These animals were condemned by the county vet himself. Sick stock. Half of them won't see next week. They're not sick, Anna said. They're starved. There's a difference. Ma'am, with respect. Don't ma'am me, Hank Raleigh. You've known me since I was 8 years old and fell out of your hayloft. That almost got a smile out of him. Almost. Fine, he said. Anna, you cannot feed 19 bison on a ranch that can't feed itself. You've got no grass. You've got a well that's dropping a foot a week. You buried your husband 4 months ago, and you're already... I'm already what? Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to, sharp enough that a few heads turned. She lowered it, but the edge stayed. Say it. I'm already what, Hank? He didn't say it, but she could see it sitting behind his eyes anyway. Grieving. Reckless. Not thinking straight. I'm thinking straighter than I have in months, she said. For the first time since they lowered Thomas into that ground, I know exactly what I'm doing. Behind them, a man in a gray coat that fit too well for a cattle auction was watching the whole exchange with the patient stillness of a man who enjoyed other people's disasters. Silas Vane didn't laugh with the crowd. He didn't need to. He just watched Anna with a small, satisfied curve at the corner of his mouth, like a man checking an item off a list. Anna felt his eyes on her before she saw him, and when she turned, he tipped his hat. Mrs. Caldwell. His voice was smooth as poured oil. Bold purchase. Mr. Vane. I confess I came here today expecting to buy that stock myself. Bone meal mostly, but the hides might have fetched something. He glanced toward the pen, toward the animals pressed together in their fear. Instead, I get to watch a widow spend her last dollar on a lost cause. There's a kind of poetry in that, don't you think? There's nothing poetic about cruelty, Mr. Vane. Cruelty. He said the word like he was tasting it and finding it bland. I'd call it business. The bank calls it business too when your note comes due in 11 weeks and you haven't got the money to cover it. He smiled wider. Which I imagine is now considerably more likely given what you just did with your savings. Anna felt her pulse in her throat, but she didn't let it show in her face. She'd learned that from Thomas, the man could hold a straight face through a house fire. My note isn't your concern until it's due, she said. And when it's due, I'll pay it. With what? Vane's eyebrows rose, genuine curiosity flickering under the practiced charm. $11 was your reserve, Mrs. Caldwell. I checked with the bank myself before I came here. You are, forgive my bluntness, a woman standing on the very last plank of a sinking ship, and you just used your final coin to buy 19 more holes to throw money into. They're not holes, Anna said. They're a herd. They're bones with hide stretched over them. For now. Vane studied her for a long moment, the smile fading into something more clinical, more assessing, like he was recalculating a number in his head. You really believe you can save them? I know I can. On dead grass, in a drought that hasn't broken in 14 months, with a well that Hank Raleigh here. He nodded toward Hank without looking at him. Has surely already told you is failing. Hank shifted his weight but said nothing. He didn't need to confirm it. Everyone in the county already knew the state of the Caldwell well. You'll lose them within the month. Vane went on, almost gently now, almost like he pitied her. And then you'll lose the ranch within the season. And when that happens, Mrs. Caldwell, I will be the very first name on the deed. Not out of spite. Simply out of arithmetic. Then you'd better hope your arithmetic is right, Anna said. Because I don't intend to make it easy for you. She turned before he could answer and walked toward the pen and did not look back to see whatever expression crossed his face. She didn't need to see it. She could feel the crowd's eyes on her back the whole way, feel the whispers trailing her like smoke. The bison inside the pen didn't move when she approached. 19 of them crowded into a space built for half that number. Ribs like ridgelines under dust-caked hide eyes, tracking her with the flat, exhausted wariness of animals that had stopped expecting kindness from anyone wearing boots. One of them, the largest, a scarred old bull standing slightly apart from the others near the rail, lifted his head and looked directly at her. Anna stopped walking. She didn't know why. There was nothing remarkable about the animal beyond his size, and even his size was a diminished thing, all bone and drooping hide where muscle should have been. But something in the way he held her gaze made her chest tighten. You look about as tired as I feel, she said quietly. The bull didn't move, just watched her breathing slow through flared nostrils, and for a moment, one strange suspended moment, Anna felt like the animal understood every word she'd just said to Silas Vane, understood the stakes, understood what she'd just risked for him and 18 others who couldn't thank her for it. Anna. Hank had followed her, his boots crunching in the dust behind her. He stopped at the rail beside her, arms folded, studying the animals with the critical eye of a man who'd spent his whole life reading livestock. You want my honest opinion? Do I have a choice? Not really, no. He nodded at the bull. That one there, the big one, he's the herd bull. Or was before whoever starved him took the fight out of him. Look at how the others hold around him. Even half dead, they're still watching him for what to do next. I noticed. That's not a compliment. Anna, that's a warning. A bull like that, once he gets some strength back, he's not going to be some tame old thing eating out of your hand. He's going to remember he's a bull. And you don't have the fencing to hold 19 wild bison, let alone the water, let alone the grass. I'll build the fencing. With what lumber? With what money you spent your last? I'll figure it out, Hank. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated that it did. Hated that after everything. After Thomas's funeral, after the bank letters, after 4 months of waking up in an empty bed and forcing herself out to the barn anyway, this was the moment her composure decided to slip. She pressed her lips together and breathed until it passed. Hank's expression softened just slightly, the way it used to when she was young, and skinned her knee and refused to cry about it. I'm not trying to break you down, he said. I'm trying to keep you from breaking yourself down further. This valley's already chewed up better ranchers than you or me. Cattle ranchers, mind you, men who knew what they were doing. And it chewed them up and spit out their bones right alongside the grass that stopped growing. What makes you think bison's starved, condemned half-wild bison are going to be any different? Anna looked back at the bull. He was still watching her. Because everyone in this valley has been doing the same thing for 30 years, she said. Cattle in fixed pastures grazing the same ground down to dirt year after year, and every year the grass comes back thinner and the water table drops another foot. You said it yourself, Hank, this valley's chewed men up. Well, maybe the valley isn't broken. Maybe we broke it. That's a mighty philosophical thing to say over a pen of dying animals. I read about it, Anna said. Before Thomas died, I used to write to my cousin in the Territorial College. She sent me papers on it, grazing patterns, root systems, how buffalo herds used to move across these plains before anyone put a fence up. They didn't stay in one place and eat it bare. They moved, grazed hard, then left, and the land had time to recover before they came back around. Buffalo, Hank said. Not condemned bison bought for $11 at a county auction. Same animal, Hank. Same animal, different circumstance. Those buffalo weren't starved half to death and crammed onto 100 acres. I've got 680 acres. That stopped him for a second. Since when? Since Thomas's father left it to us. And since I've spent the last 4 months walking every inch of it instead of sitting inside, feeling sorry for myself. Anna's voice steadied as she spoke, the tremor smoothing into something firmer. Something that sounded even to her own ears like conviction rather than desperation. The land isn't dead, Hank. It's exhausted. There's a difference, same as with them. She nodded at the bison. Give exhausted things the right kind of rest and they come back. Keep grinding them down the same way that broke them and they die. That's all I'm doing. I'm trying something different because everything the same has already failed. Hank was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, the crowd was beginning to disperse, men climbing onto wagons, a few of them still glancing back with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. Silas Vane had already turned to speak with another rancher, but Anna could feel, even without looking, that some part of his attention was still fixed on her. You're going to need help, Hank finally said. Fencing this many head on land that hasn't held a fence in years in this heat, that's not a one-woman job. That's not even a two-woman job. I'll manage. You won't. Not because you're not capable, Anna, don't hear that in what I'm saying, but because there are only so many hours in a day, and you can't be in 680 acres of places at once. Before Anna could answer, another voice cut in, younger, unfamiliar, coming from just behind her shoulder. She won't be alone. Anna turned. A man she didn't recognize stood a few feet back, hat in hand, sun-browned, in the particular way of someone who'd spent a long time outdoors without much shelter. He wasn't dressed like the ranchers around him. His coat was worn thin at the elbows, his boots patched more than once, the look of a drifter who owned exactly what he could carry. I'm sorry, Anna said. Do I know you? No, ma'am. Name's Caleb Doss. He said it plainly without ceremony, like a man used to introducing himself to strangers and having it mean nothing. I was passing through for the auction looking for work. Saw what you did back there. He nodded toward the pen. Saw the way that whole crowd laughed at you for it. And I don't much care for crowds that laugh at a person for trying to save something, Caleb said. I've got 2 hands and no particular place to be. If you're building fence for 19 head of bison, I reckon you could use a 3rd pair of hands that isn't attached to somebody who thinks you're a fool. Hank's eyebrows went up. You don't even know her, son. I know what I watched her do, Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Anna. Everyone else in that yard saw a lost cause. I saw somebody willing to lose everything for something she believed was right. Where I come from, that's rare enough to be worth betting on. Anna studied him for a long moment. There was something in his voice that didn't match the careful, guarded way most drifters spoke when they wanted work. No angle to it, no calculation. Just a plain statement offered like a fact rather than a pitch. I can't pay you, she said. Not in money. I spent the last of it. Didn't ask for money. Then what do you want? Caleb glanced toward the bull at the rail, the big scarred one who was still watching Anna with that unsettling steadiness. Same thing you want, I expect, he said. To see something everybody wrote off proved them wrong. Behind them, Silas Vane had turned back around, his attention drawn by the exchange. He watched Caleb with the faint assessing frown of a man cataloging a new variable he hadn't planned for. Well, Vane said, stepping closer, his voice pitched to Carrie. It seems Mrs. Caldwell has assembled quite the crew. A drifter with no wages, and a rancher who's already told her she's making a mistake. I confess I'm almost curious to watch how far you get." "You'll get your chance to watch, Mr. Vane," Anna said. "From wherever you're standing when this valley turns green again." A ripple of laughter went through the few remaining onlookers. Not cruel laughter this time, but something closer to surprise, the sound of people who hadn't expected the widow Caldwell to have that kind of steel in her voice. Vane's smile thinned. 11 weeks, Mrs. Caldwell. The note comes due, drought or no drought, dead grass or green. I'd enjoy seeing you succeed purely for the novelty of it, but I won't be holding my breath, and neither should you." He tipped his hat, the gesture almost mocking in its politeness, and walked toward his waiting buggy without another word. Anna watched him go, her jaw tight, and didn't relax until the buggy had pulled out of the yard entirely. "He's not wrong about the timeline," Hank said quietly. 11 weeks isn't much." "It's enough," Anna said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "It has to be." They loaded the bison that afternoon, and it was not gentle work. The animals didn't want to move. Weeks of starvation had left them wary of every sound, every shift in the wind, every hand that came near the rails. Anna stood at the gate of the makeshift chute they'd built from borrowed lumber, watching Caleb and Hank try to coax the herd forward. And it was the bull, the big scarred one, who finally broke the standoff, not because anyone forced him, but because he simply decided to move, and the rest of the herd followed him the way water follows a channel. "There," Hank said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the day's dying heat. "Told you. Herd bull. Everything follows him." "What should I call him?" Anna asked, mostly to herself. "Ma'am?" Caleb looked up from where he was securing the last of the chute rails. "He needs a name. If I'm going to save this herd, I ought to at least know who I'm arguing with." She watched the bull step up into the wagon bed unhurried, despite his weakness, his dark eyes finding hers once more through the slats. "Ash," she said, "for the color of him, and for what's left after everything's been burned down to nothing." Caleb nodded slowly, like the name settled something in him. Fitting. The ride back to the Caldwell ranch took the better part of 2 hours, the wagon groaning under its living cargo dust rising behind them in a long gray column that Anna kept glancing back at, half expecting to see Silas Vane's buggy following, just to watch her fail in real time. He wasn't there. But she knew he didn't need to be. His attention would find her soon enough, one way or another. By the time they reached the ranch, the light had gone the color of a dying ember, and Anna's arms ached from hours of physical work she hadn't done in months, maybe years, not since before she married Thomas, before the ranch became something managed rather than worked. "We'll need water for them tonight," Hank said, already moving toward the well with a bucket in hand before Anna could answer. "And grain if you've got any left." "I've got a little," Anna said. "Not much." "It'll have to do." They worked in the fading light, hauling water, forking what little hay remained in the barn. And the whole time, Anna watched the bison settle slowly, warily into the corral Thomas's father had built decades ago, and that hadn't held anything larger than a handful of milk cows in years. Ash stood apart from the rest near the fence line closest to the house, and when Anna approached with a bucket, he didn't shy away the way the others did. He simply watched her breathing slow, patient, in a way that felt less like exhaustion now and more like deliberation. "I don't know if you can understand a word I'm saying," Anna told him quietly, setting the bucket down within his reach. "But I bought you back from a death sentence today, and I intend to see that decision through no matter what that banker thinks, no matter what the whole county thinks. So you and me, we've got an agreement now, whether you know it or not. You don't die on me, and I don't quit on you." Ash lowered his great head and drank. Behind her, Caleb had come to lean against the fence post, watching the exchange with an expression Anna couldn't quite read, something between admiration and quiet recognition, like a man seeing something familiar in a stranger's grief. "You talk to him like he understands," Caleb said. "Maybe he does," Anna said. "More than most people in this valley, at least. I don't doubt that." He was quiet a moment, watching the herd settle further into the dusk, 19 shapes going still against the darkening corral. For what it's worth, Mrs. Caldwell, I've seen a lot of lost causes in my time. Places I passed through that were already dead before anyone admitted it. This doesn't feel like that. What does it feel like? Caleb considered the question longer than she expected. Feels like the start of something people are going to talk about for a long while, he said. One way or the other. Anna looked out over the corral at the shapes of 19 starving animals, standing in the dark at the fence that wouldn't hold them for more than a season, without serious work at the well that Hank had already warned her was failing at the note coming due in 11 weeks that she had no earthly idea how she'd pay, and still something in her chest. Something that had been silent and cold since the day they buried Thomas, stirred back to life. Let them talk, she said. Let the whole valley talk. Come rain or ruin, I'm not backing down from this. Behind her in the dark, Ash let out a low sound. Not quite a bellow, not quite a breath, something in between, and for reasons Anna couldn't fully explain, it sounded almost like agreement. Hank came up beside her, wiping his hands on his trousers, studying the corral with the weary expression of a man who still believed he was watching a mistake unfold, but who no longer seemed entirely certain of it. 11 weeks, he said quietly. That's what Vane gave you. I know. You understand what happens if you're wrong. About the land, about the herd, about all of it. Anna kept her eyes on Ash on the way he stood at the fence line like a sentinel over animals too weak to protect themselves. I understand exactly what happens, she said. I lose the only thing my husband left me to the one man in this valley who's been waiting for an excuse to take it. Her hands tightened at her sides. So I don't intend to be wrong. The wind shifted, carrying the dry smell of dust and dying grass across the yard, and somewhere out past the tree line, thunder rolled low and distant, the kind of sound the valley had heard 100 times over the past year, without a single drop of rain following it. Anna looked toward the sound anyway. Not yet, she murmured. But soon. She didn't know, standing there in the failing light, with 19 starved animals breathing behind her and a banknote ticking down toward ruin, just how much would have to break before that promise came true. How much fire, how much fear, how much of herself she would have to spend before Cedar Fork Valley remembered what it meant to be green again. But she knew this much: she wasn't walking away, not from the herd, not from the land, and not from the man in the gray coat who was already counting the days until she failed. Anna woke before dawn to the sound of wood cracking. She was out of bed and running before she'd even found her boots, bare feet slapping against packed earth, and by the time she reached the corral, her heart was already hammering against her ribs. In the gray half-light, she could see the rail on the north side bowed outward, splintering under the combined weight of 19 bison pressed against it, spooked by something she couldn't yet name. Ash, she called, though she had no earthly reason to believe a bull would answer to a name he'd worn for less than a day. Ash, easy, easy now. He turned his massive head toward her voice, and for one suspended second, the whole herd seemed to hold its breath with him. Then the rail gave. Wood shrieked and splintered, and the herd surged forward in a wave of dust and panic. And Anna threw herself sideways into the gap, just quick enough to grab the loose end of rope hanging from the broken post, not to stop 19 bison with her bare hands. Nobody could do that, but to swing the gate that stood adjacent, shut before the whole herd found the open pasture, and scattered clean across 680 acres of unfenced land. "Caleb!" she screamed. "Caleb!" He came out of the bunkhouse, half-dressed, boots unlaced, and didn't ask a single question. He simply ran, vaulted the lower rail, and threw his shoulder against the swinging gate right alongside her. The two of them bracing it shut with nothing but their own weight, while the herd thundered past on the other side, close enough that Anna could feel the heat coming off their bodies, smell the fierce sweat rising off 19 starved animals, suddenly reminded of every reason they had to be afraid of enclosed spaces. "Hold it!" Caleb gritted through his teeth. "Hold it, don't you let go. I'm not letting go." The herd hit the gate once, twice, a battering of muscle and horn that rattled through Anna's bones. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The panic broke. And there, standing at the front of the herd, was Ash planted like a boulder, and every single animal behind him had gone still simply because he had. Anna's breath came out of her in a ragged, disbelieving laugh. "He stopped them," she said. "Caleb, look, he stopped them." Caleb straightened up slowly, wiping sweat from his brow, staring at the bull with an expression that had lost some of its earlier caution. "That ain't natural, Mrs. Caldwell." "Anna," she said, "if you're going to hold a gate shut with me at 4 a.m, you can call me Anna." "Anna, then." He managed a tired half-smile. "That still ain't natural." Hank arrived at a dead run a few minutes later, shirt untucked, rifle in hand, because in Cedar Fork Valley, the sound of a rail breaking in the dark could mean predators, could mean a dozen worse things. And when he saw the situation, when he saw the rope and shoulder repair holding a bowed gate against a herd of settled bison, he lowered the rifle slowly and looked at Anna like he was reassessing something. "What in God's name happened here?" "North rail gave," Anna said. "Woods rotted clean through. I should have checked it before we brought them home. I just didn't think—" "You didn't think because nobody thinks to check 30-year-old fencing before loading it up with wild bison," Hank said. "That's not a failure of judgment, Anna. That's just—" He stopped, looked at the herd standing calm now behind the makeshift gate, looked at Ash still planted at the front like a sentry. "How'd you get them to settle so fast?" "I didn't," Anna said. "He did." Hank studied the bull for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. "In 30 years of ranching," he said slowly, "I have never once seen a spooked herd stop dead like that. Cattle, you can't stop a stampede short of a canyon wall or a bullet. They don't have a—" he searched for the word, "a conscience to them. They just run till something stops them." "Bison aren't cattle," Anna said. "I keep telling you that. I'm starting to believe you." He rubbed a hand over his face, the exhaustion of a 63-year-old man who'd been woken at 4 a.m. by the sound of disaster and looked at the broken rail with a critical eye. "This whole fence line is rotted, not just this section. You want my honest assessment. When have you ever given me anything else? Every rail on this property that hasn't been replaced in the last decade is going to fail exactly like this one did sooner or later, and next time you might not have Caleb here to throw his shoulder into it with you." He looked at her direct and unflinching. "You cannot hold 19 bison behind 30-year-old fencing, Anna. It's not a question of if it fails again. It's a question of when." Anna felt the weight of that settle into her chest, heavy and cold. "I don't have money for new fencing, Hank. You know that." "I know it. So what am I supposed to do?" Hank was quiet for a moment, looking out past the corral toward the open pasture beyond brown and cracked and barely holding what grass remained. "You said something yesterday," he said slowly. "About buffalo not staying in one place. About moving the herd instead of holding it. Rotational grazing," Anna said. "Small paddocks move them every few days. Let the land behind them rest and recover. If you're moving them constantly between small enclosures instead of holding them all in one big pen," Hank said, "you don't need one strong fence holding back 19 animals all at once. You need a lot of smaller, lighter fences moved as you go. Temporary, portable." He was thinking out loud now, working through it the way he worked through any ranching problem, methodically out loud, testing each piece. "That's less lumber, not more. Less permanent construction. You could do it with rope and posts you drive yourself, move it every few days." Anna stared at him. "Hank Raleigh, are you helping me?" "I'm pointing out a fact," he said gruffly. "Don't go making it into something it isn't." But Caleb, still catching his breath by the gate, was grinning. "Sounded like helping to me. Shut it, son." They started that same morning before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, because Anna had learned in 4 months of grief and desperation that if she stopped moving even for an hour, the weight of everything waiting to crush her would catch up. She walked the full 680 acres with Hank and Caleb at her sides, a stub of pencil and a torn ledger page in her hand, marking out where the paddocks would go. Small sections no more than 20 or 30 acres each, close enough to water that she wouldn't need to haul it by hand every single day, far enough apart that grazing in one wouldn't touch the recovery of another. This is going to take weeks, Hank said, studying her rough map with a skeptical frown. You're talking about dividing the whole property, driving posts, stringing line, moving the herd through each section in sequence. I know how long it'll take. You've got 11 weeks total, Anna, before Vane's note comes due. You're talking about spending half that time just building the system before you even know if it works. Then I'd better get started, Anna said, and kept walking. They worked through the heat of the day, and Anna's hands, soft from months of grief and idleness inside a farmhouse, instead of out on the land split and blistered on the first day, bled through her gloves on the second. And by the third day, she'd stopped noticing the pain at all, because there was too much else demanding her attention. It was on the fourth day that Ash refused to move. They'd finished the first paddock, a modest 20 acres along the eastern edge, close to a spring-fed trough that hadn't fully dried, and Caleb opened the gate to guide the herd in, and every single bison walked forward without hesitation. Except Ash. He stood at the gate, nostrils flared, and would not take a single step past the threshold. "Come on now," Caleb said, waving a hand, trying the gentle coaxing that had worked on every other animal in the herd. "Come on, big fella, in you go." Ash didn't move. "He's spooked," Caleb said, frowning. "Something's got him spooked." Anna walked up slowly, studying the bull, studying the paddock beyond him, trying to see whatever it was he was seeing. "Hank," she said, "does anything look wrong to you?" Hank came up beside her, following Ash's line of sight toward the trough at the center of the paddock. He was quiet for a long moment. "The water," he said finally. "Look at the color of it." Anna looked. The trough, which should have held the pale gray-brown of spring water pulling through drought-cracked earth, held something darker, an oily sheen sitting on the surface that she hadn't noticed from a distance. "That's not right," Hank said, already moving toward it, crouching at the edge, studying the water with the careful eye of a man who'd spent decades reading land for a living. "This spring's never run like this, not in 30 years. "Is it poisoned?" Anna asked, her stomach dropping. "I don't know. Could be mineral runoff from somewhere upslope. Could be something dead decomposing further up the channel." He stood, wiping his hand on his trousers, his face troubled in a way Anna hadn't seen from him before. "Could be something worse." "Worse how?" Hank didn't answer right away, and in the silence Anna felt something cold settle in her chest, the first whisper of a suspicion she didn't yet want to say out loud. "You said Vane checked with the bank about your note before the auction," Hank said slowly. "Man like that doesn't leave things to chance. If he wants this ranch, and he's confident he's going to get it eventually anyway, a smart man doesn't need to poison a spring. He just waits. But if he's not confident," Anna said, the thought completing itself as she spoke it. "If he's worried I might actually succeed, then a man like that might decide to help the arithmetic along a little." They stood there in silence for a moment, the herd shuffling restlessly behind them, Ash still refusing the gate, and Anna felt the first genuine flicker of fear she'd allowed herself since the auction. Not fear for the ranch, not fear for the note, but fear that the man in the gray coat was willing to do more than wait for her to fail. "We can't prove anything," Caleb said quietly. "Not from a discolored trough. No." Anna agreed. "We can't." She looked at Ash, who was still standing firm at the gate, refusing to move his herd toward water. His instincts told him not to trust. But he knew before we did. They diverted the herd to a different paddock that day, one fed by a different channel, and Hank spent the following morning riding the spring line upslope, tracing the water back toward its source, looking for anything that might explain the discoloration. A dead animal fallen into the channel, mineral deposits, anything natural. He came back at midday with his jaw set tight, and didn't say much beyond. Found some disturbed ground near the head spring. Somebody'd been up there recently. Can't say for certain what they did. "Can't say or won't say?" Anna asked. "Can't prove," Hank said. "There's a difference, and until I've got proof I'm not going to go accusing a man like Silas Vane of poisoning wells, because if I'm wrong, he'll own this whole valley inside a year out of pure spite." Anna understood the caution, even as it frustrated her. She'd lived in Cedar Fork Valley long enough to know exactly how much power a man like Vane held the bank, half the grazing leases a hand, in nearly every transaction that moved money through the county. An accusation without proof wouldn't just fail, it would hand him a weapon. So they said nothing. They simply rerouted the herd, marked the fouled spring off the map, and kept building. By the end of the first week, they had 3 paddocks finished, and the herd was cycling through them on a schedule. Anna adjusted daily, watching the grass, watching the animals, watching for any sign that the system might be working, or might be as half the valley already believed a fool's errand born of grief. The trip into town for supplies came on the 8th day, and Anna dreaded it the entire ride in. The feed store was crowded when she arrived a Saturday. Most of the valley's ranchers gathered to trade news and supplies, and the moment she stepped through the door, the conversation didn't stop exactly, but it changed. Voices dropped, eyes turned. She felt it settle over her like a physical weight, the particular attention of a room that had already decided what it thought of her. "Well, if it isn't Caldwell's Folly herself," a man near the counter said, not quite under his breath, just quiet enough to pretend it hadn't been meant for her to hear. Anna kept her spine straight and walked to the counter. "50 pounds of grain if you've got it," she said to the clerk. "And whatever wire you can spare. Wire's dear this season," the clerk said, not unkindly, but with the flat practicality of a man who dealt in scarcity every day. "Drought's got everyone stocking up. I can let you have some, but it'll cost you." "I'll pay what I can. Heard you spent everything you had on them bison," another voice said, a rancher named Otis Meeker, a heavy-set man Anna vaguely remembered from Thomas's funeral, though he hadn't offered condolences then either. "Heard you're out there building little fences all over your land like it's some kind of children's game." "It's called rotational grazing," Anna said evenly. "It's not a game. It's a fool's errand is what it is," Meeker said louder now, playing to the room. "Ain't nobody in this valley ever run bison like that. We run cattle same as our fathers did, same as their fathers before them. You think you know better than 3 generations of ranching because your cousin sent you some fancy college papers." Anna felt the heat rise in her face, but she held it, forced her voice level. "I think 3 generations of ranching the same way is exactly why this valley's grass hasn't come back in 14 months, she said. "I think maybe doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results isn't wisdom, Mr. Meeker. It's just stubbornness with a longer memory." A ripple went through the store, not quite laughter, not quite agreement, but something uncertain, something that hadn't existed in the room a moment before. Meeker's face reddened. "You watch your mouth, Mrs. Caldwell. Your husband would be ashamed to hear you talk to your elders that way." That landed exactly where he'd meant it to. Anna felt it strike, felt the old grief flare raw and sudden beneath her composure, and for a moment she couldn't find a single word to answer with. It was Hank who answered for her. He'd come in behind her without her noticing, and now he stepped up to the counter, setting his own supplies down with a heavy thud. "Otis," he said in a voice that carried the particular authority of a man who'd earned every gray hair on his head through hard-won respect. "I've known Thomas Caldwell's family longer than you've been drawing breath in this valley, and I'll tell you plain, Thomas would be prouder of that woman right now than he ever was of anything in his whole life. She buried her husband, buried her savings in a herd nobody else wanted, and she's out there at 4 in the morning holding gates shut with her own 2 hands, while half this town sits around this store running its mouth about children's games." The room had gone very quiet. "You want to talk about what her husband would be ashamed of?" Hank went on, his voice rising, now unmistakably angry. "He'd be ashamed of you, Otis Meeker, standing here mocking a grieving widow for trying to save land this whole valley let die on our watch." Meeker opened his mouth, found nothing to say, and closed it again. Anna stared at Hank, something tight and grateful rising in her throat that she didn't trust herself to speak through. 50 pounds of grain," Hank said to the clerk, his voice returning to something closer to normal, though the edge hadn't fully left it. "And whatever wire you can spare her. Put both our orders on my account if hers comes up short." "Hank, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said, not looking at her, still glaring faintly at Meeker, as though daring him to say another word. "I'm doing it anyway. Now hush and let the man ring us up before I say something I can't take back." They left the feed store 20 minutes later, wagon loaded, and neither of them spoke until they'd cleared the edge of town. "You didn't have to do that," Anna finally said. "Back there. With Otis." "No," Hank agreed. "I didn't." "Why did you—" He was quiet for a long moment, hands steady on the reins, looking straight ahead down the dusty road. "Because I watched that bull stop a stampede with nothing but his own 2 feet planted in the dirt," he said. "Because I watched him refuse a poisoned spring before any of us knew it was poisoned. And because I've spent 8 days watching you work harder than any rancher I've seen in this valley in 20 years, and I got tired of hearing men who haven't lifted a shovel in a decade mock you for trying." He glanced at her sideways. "Doesn't mean I think you're going to succeed, Anna. 11 weeks is 11 weeks drought or no drought, but I'll be damned if I'm going to stand around and let this town tear you down before you've even had your fair shot at it." Anna felt something in her chest loosen just slightly for the first time since the auction. "Thank you, Hank." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me if the grass comes back." They found Silas Vane waiting at the crossroads on the way home. His buggy sat pulled off to the side, and he stepped down as they approached. Unhurried, the picture of a man with nowhere pressing to be, which Anna understood immediately was itself a kind of message that he had come specifically to see. Her had waited specifically for this moment. "Mrs. Caldwell." He tipped his hat. "Mr. Raleigh, I trust the trip into town was productive." "Productive enough," Anna said, not slowing the wagon. "I heard there was quite a scene at the feed store." Vane fell into step beside the wagon as it passed unbothered by the pace. Otis Meeker, embarrassed in front of half the valley by Hank Raleigh of all people, defending the widow Caldwell. Word travels fast in a small county. "Word usually does," Hank said flatly, "when there's men with nothing better to do than spread it." Vane's smile didn't waver. "I merely find it interesting. 10 days ago you told this same woman she was making a mistake. Now you're defending her in the middle of the feed store." "A man can think something's a mistake and still not stomach watching it mocked by cowards," Hank said. "Fair enough." Vane's gaze shifted to Anna. "And how is the herd, Mrs. Caldwell? I heard mention of a fence failure. Nearly a disaster from what I understand." Anna's grip tightened on the reins, though she kept her voice even. "Word really does travel fast." "It does, especially when it concerns a debt I hold." He said it lightly, but the words landed with deliberate weight. "I do hope the animals are settling. It would be such a shame for something else to happen to them before your note comes due. Drought does terrible things to livestock, you know. Weakens them, makes them susceptible to all manner of misfortune." Anna stopped the wagon. She looked at him directly, searching his face for any flicker of guilt, any tell that would confirm what Hank had refused to accuse him of outright. "Is that a threat, Mr. Vane?" "Heavens, no." He looked genuinely affronted, though Anna couldn't tell how much of it was performance. "Merely an observation about the harshness of the season. I would never wish misfortune on anyone, Mrs. Caldwell. I simply collect on what's owed when it comes due. What happens between now and then is entirely in the hands of Providence." He tipped his hat again. 10 weeks, 6 days. Do give my regards to your remarkable herd." He returned to his buggy without waiting for a response, and Anna watched him go, her pulse hammering with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite fury, but sat somewhere dangerous between the two. "He knows about the fence," she said quietly. "He knows about the spring." "Maybe," Hank said. "Or maybe he's just a man who likes to sound like he knows everything because it rattles people same as if he did. Does it matter which if the effect is the same?" Hank didn't have an answer for that. The dry storm came 6 nights later, and it was in some ways worse than the fence breaking. Anna heard the thunder first, a low rolling growl that started somewhere far off and grew steadily closer, and by the time she'd pulled her boots on and reached the door, the sky had gone the color of a fresh bruise lit every few seconds by lightning that struck without a single drop of rain following it. Dry lightning. The most dangerous kind in a drought like this one, no rain to answer the fire. It could start only dead grass and dry timber waiting for a spark. The herd was already screaming, not the low bellow of contentment or the occasional grunt of irritation, but something higher, sharper, a chorus of genuine terror that Anna had never heard from them before, and she ran for the paddock with her heart in her throat, Caleb close behind her, both of them half-dressed and barefoot. In some cases, none of it mattering against the urgency of the sound. The herd had bunched against the far fence line as far from the open sky as they could get, and Ash was pacing the perimeter agitated in a way Anna hadn't seen since the auction yard. "Lightning's got them spooked!" Caleb shouted over the wind that had kicked up alongside the thunder. "If it strikes close, they're going to run, and this fence isn't built to hold a full panic." "I know. We need to get them into the open pasture away from the paddock lines before a strike sends them straight through the wire. If we open the gates now in this dark, in this wind, we could lose half of them scattered across 600 acres. We could lose all of them if that fence gives and they run blind into it." Anna's mind raced, trying to weigh two catastrophic options against each other, with lightning splitting the sky every few seconds and 19 animals screaming their fear into the dark. It was Ash who decided for her. He broke from his pacing and moved directly to the gate, not thrashing against it, not panicking, but standing there deliberate waiting. "He wants out," Anna said. "Caleb, he wants the gate open, he's not panicking. Look at him, he's choosing." "Anna, if we're wrong." "We're not wrong. Open it." Caleb hesitated one more second, then threw the latch, and the gate swung wide and Ash didn't bolt through it in a blind stampede the way Anna had feared. He walked unhurried, and the herd followed him, not scattered, not chaotic, but strung out behind him in a loose, deliberate line, moving away from the fenced paddocks toward the open, unobstructed pasture beyond, where there was nothing for a panicked animal to run blind into. Anna stood in the wind and watched them go, lightning cracking overhead, rain still refusing to fall, and felt something close to awe settle over her fear. "He's leading them away from the danger," she said half to herself. "Not just running, leading." "I told you that bull wasn't natural," Caleb said, breathless, watching alongside her. They followed at a distance close enough to track the herd's shapes in the intermittent lightning, far enough not to spook them further, and for the better part of an hour, Anna stood in the wind and the dry thunder, and watched Ash hold his herd together through a storm that would have scattered any cattle drive in the county. By the time the lightning finally passed, moving off toward the eastern ridge without ever delivering the rain, the whole valley had been praying for the herd had settled in the open pasture, calm intact, all 19 accounted for. Anna sank down onto a fence post, suddenly aware of how badly her hands were shaking, how exhausted she was, how close they'd come to catastrophe. "You all right?" Caleb asked, crouching beside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I keep waiting for something to finally break all the way. The fence, the herd, me." She laughed, short and humorless. "Mostly me some nights." Caleb was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice had dropped into something gentler, more careful than his usual plain-spoken manner. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think you're going to break. I've watched a lot of people fold under a lot less than what you're carrying. You're not one of them." Anna looked at him, surprised by the sudden warmth in his words, and found him watching her with an expression that made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion. "You don't know that," she said quietly. "I know what I've seen," Caleb said. 8 days, and I've watched you hold a gate shut with your bare hands, stand up to Silas Vane without blinking, and just now, trust an animal's instincts over your own fear in the middle of a lightning storm. Whatever you were before your husband died, ma'am, you've become something this valley hasn't seen in a long while." Anna didn't answer right away. The wind had died down, and in the sudden quiet, she could hear the herd settling behind them, could hear her own heartbeat slowing back toward normal, and she found herself acutely aware of how close Caleb was sitting, how steady his presence had become in the space of little more than a week. "Thomas would have hated all this," she said finally quietly. "The bison, the fences, the risk of it. He was careful, my husband, methodical. He never would have spent his last dollar on a lost cause." "Maybe," Caleb said. Or maybe grief changes a person into somebody their husband never got the chance to meet. Anna looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them that neither of them reached for directly, and then she stood brushing dust from her skirt, breaking the moment before it could become something she wasn't ready for. "We should get some sleep," she said. "Sunrise comes early, whether the storm passed through or not." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said, and if he was disappointed, he didn't show it. The following morning, Hank arrived to find the herd grazing calmly in the open pasture, and when Anna told him what had happened, the storm, the panic Ash leading the herd to safety on his own instinct, he was quiet for a long time, studying the animals with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "In 30 years, he said finally, I have never once seen livestock make a decision like that. Cattle don't lead each other away from danger. They just run, and whoever's fastest survives, and the rest either follow by accident or don't survive at all." He shook his head slowly. That bull didn't just avoid a fence he couldn't see in the dark. He read the danger, picked the safest ground, and moved his whole herd there, deliberate as any trail boss I've ever ridden with. "I told you they weren't just animals to move around," Anna said. "They're not something you manage, Hank. They're something you listen to." Hank looked at her, and for the first time since the auction, there was no skepticism in his expression at all. Only something like genuine reconsideration, a man recalculating 30 years of certainty against evidence he couldn't argue with. "I rode past the fouled spring again yesterday," he said. "Wanted another look now that a few days had passed. And water's running clear again. Whatever caused the discoloration, it wasn't permanent." He hesitated. "Found something else, though. Boot prints near the head spring. Fresh ones, since the last rain. Not that we've had rain, but since the last time the ground was disturbed enough to leave a clean print. 2 sets. Neither of them belong to you, me, or Caleb." Anna felt her stomach tighten. "Vane's men. Can't prove it," Hank said again, the same careful refrain. "But I'd wager my last dollar on it if I had one left to wager." "So he really did try something." "Tried and it didn't work," Hank said. "That bull refused the water before it could do any harm. Whatever Vane's man put up there, your herd smelled the danger before any of us did." He looked out over the pasture, over 19 animals grazing calm in the morning light, and something in his weathered face shifted, settled into a kind of grudging respect that Anna understood had taken him 8 hard days and a lightning storm to earn. "I owe you an apology, Anna." "For what?" "For standing at that auction telling you this was a fool's errand." He met her eyes. "I still don't know if you're going to win this fight. 11 weeks is 11 weeks, and grass doesn't grow back overnight no matter how smart your herd bull is. But I was wrong to call it foolish. There's something happening out here I don't fully understand yet, and I'd rather stand beside you and watch it than stand back and mock it, same as Otis Meeker." Anna felt tears sting unexpectedly at the back of her eyes, and she blinked them away before they could fall. "That means more than you know, Hank." "Don't get sentimental on me," he said gruffly, though the corner of his mouth had softened. "We've still got a whole valley of doubters between here and success, and a man in a gray coat who isn't done trying yet whatever he tried at that spring." As if summoned by the words themselves, hoofbeats sounded on the road leading up to the ranch, and a moment later, a rider Anna didn't recognize came into view. Young unfamiliar, wearing a look of barely contained nervousness as he approached. "Mrs. Caldwell," he called out, reining in at a distance. "That's me. Message from Mr. Vane, ma'am." The young man's eyes flicked toward Hank, toward the herd grazing in the pasture behind them, before settling back on Anna with obvious discomfort. "He asked me to inform you that he's moved up the terms of your note." Anna's blood went cold. "Moved it up? By how much?" 3 weeks, ma'am. Says it's within his rights under the original agreement on account of—" The young man hesitated clearly, reciting something he'd been told, rather than something he understood. "On account of increased risk to the collateral, given the unconventional nature of the livestock securing the loan." "That's not in the original terms," Hank said sharply. I've seen enough loan papers in this county to know a man can't just move up a due date because he doesn't approve of what livestock you bought." "I'm just delivering the message, sir," the young man said, already backing his horse away. "Mr. Vane said you'd want to see the paperwork yourself. Says he's happy to explain it in person if you'd care to visit the bank." He didn't wait for a response, spurring his horse back toward the road and leaving Anna standing in the pasture with her hands clenched at her sides. 8 weeks suddenly narrowed down to 5, the ground beneath everything she'd built in the last 8 days, suddenly violently unstable again. "He's cheating," she said, her voice tight with fury. "He tried to poison the spring, it didn't work, and now he's just going to cheat me out of the time instead." "We'll go to the bank," Hank said. "Today, I'll bring every paper I've got on grazing loans in this county, and we will find out exactly what rights that man actually has versus what he's telling a 19-year-old messenger boy to say." Anna looked out over the pasture, over Ash, standing watchful at the center of his herd, over the fragile, hard-won progress of 8 days that suddenly felt like it was hanging by a thread far thinner than she'd believed that morning. 5 weeks. She had 5 weeks now to prove that dying land could remember how to live. 5 weeks to outbuild, outwork, and outlast a man with more money and more patience for cruelty than she had ever imagined facing. "Then we'd better move fast," she said, and turned toward the house to change out of her work clothes, already running through every argument, every scrap of grazing law Thomas had ever mentioned in passing, every ounce of resolve she had left to spend. Because if Silas Vane thought a shortened note and a fouled spring were enough to break her, he did not yet understand what kind of woman had walked into that auction yard 8 days ago and bought 19 dying animals nobody else believed were worth saving. He was about to find out. The ride into town felt longer than any Anna had made in her life, though the road hadn't changed an inch since the day she'd married Thomas, and rode it as a bride instead of a widow, fighting for her land. Hank drove the wagon himself, a satchel of papers wedged between his boots, and he didn't speak much beyond the occasional muttered oath at the state of the road, dry-rutted and unforgiving after 14 months without real rain. Anna sat beside him with her hands folded tight in her lap, rehearsing arguments she wasn't sure would matter once she was standing in front of Silas Vane's desk. "You're grinding your jaw," Hank said, not looking at her. "I'm thinking." "You're grinding your jaw and thinking. Man like Vane, he'll read that as fear before you even open your mouth." "Then what do you suggest?" "Walk in like you already won," Hank said. "Doesn't matter if you feel like you did. Man like that respects certainty more than he respects truth." Anna took a breath, forced her shoulders back, and by the time the bank came into view, a squat brick building standing apart from the wood-frame storefronts around it. The only structure in town that looked like it had never once worried about drought. She had rebuilt her composure into something that at least resembled the woman who'd raised her hand at that auction 11 days ago. Silas Vane was waiting for them in his office, seated behind a desk too large for the room, and he rose when they entered with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell? Mr. Raleigh. I confess I expected you sooner." "You moved my note up by 3 weeks," Anna said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I want to see the paperwork that gives you that right." "Of course." He gestured to the chairs across from his desk, unhurried, savoring the moment the way a man savors a meal he's confident he'll finish. "Please sit." "I'll stand." "As you wish." Vane opened a drawer, produced a folder, and slid a single page across the desk toward her. Clause 7, Paragraph 2. Any material increase in risk to the collateral securing the loan entitles the lender to adjust repayment terms accordingly at the lender's sole discretion. Anna scanned the page, her stomach tightening as she found the clause exactly where he'd said it would be in Thomas's careful signature at the bottom of a document she vaguely remembered him mentioning years ago and never explaining in full. "What material increase in risk?" she demanded. "I haven't done anything to the land. I've improved it. You replaced stable insured cattle collateral with 19 head of condemned uninsurable bison," Vane said smoothly. "Animals the county vet himself declared unfit for market. That is by any reasonable definition a material increase in risk." "They weren't collateral," Hank cut in. "The land was collateral. The land itself, not whatever livestock happened to be standing on it. The land and its productive use, Vane corrected unbothered. A ranch that cannot demonstrate viable livestock operations is a ranch whose value as collateral has diminished. I am well within my rights. You're twisting the language to suit yourself, Anna said. I am reading the language exactly as written, Vane said, which your late husband signed willingly with full understanding of its terms. I am sorry if that understanding was never shared with you, Mrs. Caldwell, but that is a matter between you and a dead man, not between you and me. The cruelty of it landed exactly where he intended, and Anna felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, felt 11 days of exhaustion and grief and fury rise up in her chest all at once. You poisoned my spring, she said, the accusation finally leaving her mouth before she could stop it. Vane's expression didn't change, not even slightly, and that stillness was somehow more damning than any flicker of guilt would have been. That is a serious accusation, Mrs. Caldwell. Do you have proof? Boot prints, Hank said. Fresh ones near the head spring the same week the water turned foul. Boot prints. Vane almost laughed. Half this county walks that ridgeline, hunting, fishing, minding their own grazing leases. You'll find boot prints on every inch of open land in this valley, Mr. Raleigh, and not one of them proves a thing beyond the fact that people occasionally walk outdoors. He folded his hands on the desk. I would be very careful about repeating an accusation like that without evidence. Slander is its own kind of debt, and I collect on those too. The threat sat plainly between them, and Anna understood with a cold clarity that she would get nothing here. No confession, no admission, no crack in the man's composure. He had built himself entirely out of careful language and patient cruelty, and neither she nor Hank had the weapon to break through either one today. 5 weeks, she said instead, forcing the fury back down into something usable. Fine, I'll have your money in 5 weeks. I do hope so, Vane said, rising to signal the meeting's end. For your sake, and for the sake of that remarkable herd everyone in town seems to be talking about now. It would be a shame to lose them both. They left the bank in silence, and it wasn't until they'd cleared the edge of town that Hank finally spoke. He's not going to stop, he said. Whatever he tried at the spring, whatever he's planning next, a man like that doesn't back down just because his first play didn't land clean. I know. So what do we do? Anna looked out over the dry browning hills stretching toward her ranch, toward 19 animals, depending on choices she was making with less certainty than she'd ever admitted out loud. We work faster, she said, and we watch our backs. The days that followed blurred into a punishing rhythm up before dawn, driving posts, until her palms bled fresh through calluses that hadn't fully hardened yet, moving the herd between paddocks on a schedule she adjusted daily, based on grass height and soil moisture. She measured by hand, kneeling in the dirt, with her fingers pressed into the earth like she was taking its pulse. It was on the 16th day that she found the first sign. She was kneeling in the third paddock, the one they'd grazed and rested twice already, running her fingers through the base of the grass, the way she'd taught herself from her cousin's papers, checking for root depth, checking for the pale, brittle brown that meant a plant had given up entirely. Instead, she found green, not much. A thread of it buried low at the crown of a clump of grass that had looked completely dead 3 weeks earlier, so small she nearly missed it entirely, but unmistakably impossibly green. Hank! She was on her feet and running before she'd fully processed what she'd seen, calling his name across the paddock, with a desperation that brought both him and Caleb sprinting toward her hands, already reaching for weapons, neither of them had expecting disaster instead of discovery. Hank, come look at this. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She dropped back to her knees, pointing at the base of the grass clump with a hand that was shaking. Look, right there. Tell me I'm not imagining it. Hank crouched down slowly, studying the spot she pointed to, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Well, I'll be damned, he finally murmured. Is it real? It's real. He touched it gently, almost reverently, a man who'd spent 30 years reading land the way other men read scripture. Green crown growing up out of a root system I would have sworn was dead. This clump was standing bare when we moved the herd off it 3 weeks back. So it's growing again, Anna said. The rest resting the ground, it's actually working. One clump of grass isn't a valley, Anna. But it's not nothing either. Hank straightened up, looking out over the paddock with an expression Anna hadn't seen on him before. Not the skepticism of the auction yard. Not even the grudging respect after the storm, but something closer to wonder a man watching a piece of his own certainty about the world quietly rearrange itself. No, he agreed slowly. It's not nothing. Caleb had crouched down beside them, studying the small green thread with the same careful attention. 16 days, he said. That's fast, isn't it? For land this far gone. Faster than I would have guessed, Hank admitted. I've seen overgrazed pasture take years to show new growth if it ever does at all. This, he gestured at the clump. This is different. Something about moving the herd through quick and giving the roots time before they're bit again. It's not healing the whole system yet, but it's not dying anymore either. Anna sat back on her heels, staring at the tiny green thread until her eyes blurred, and when she finally wiped her face, she wasn't entirely sure if it was sweat or something else entirely. 11 days ago, this whole valley stood in that auction yard and laughed at me, she said quietly. 11 days, Hank. I know. I need them to see this. Hank hesitated. Anna, one clump of grass isn't proof of anything to a man like Otis Meeker. It's not proof to Vane either. You show this to the wrong crowd too soon, they'll say you found one lucky patch and call it a miracle to cover for a fool's errand that hasn't actually worked. Then I won't show them yet, Anna said, standing brushing the dirt from her knees with new resolve steadying her hands. But I know now, and that's enough to keep going. The second sign came 4 days later, and this time it wasn't grass, it was the well. Anna had taken to checking the water level each morning with a length of knotted rope, a habit born of Hank's warning weeks earlier that the well was dropping a foot a week. A countdown she'd been too afraid to stop tracking, even as it filled her with dread each time. That morning the rope came up wet, a full 6 inches higher than it had the day before. She checked it twice, certain she'd made an error. Certain the rope had simply been misjudged in the dim early light. But the mark was clear both times, and she stood at the wellhead with her heart hammering, trying to understand what she was looking at. Hank. This time he came at a jog, rather than a run. Having learned over the past weeks that Anna's calls of alarm were as often good news as bad. Hank, the well's up, 6 inches since yesterday. Hank checked the rope himself, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. That doesn't track with a drought 14 months deep. Wells don't just recover overnight, not from rain. We haven't even had. Then what's causing it? He was quiet for a long moment, turning the rope over in his hands, thinking. Root systems, he said slowly. You said your cousin's papers talked about grass roots, how deep-rooted native grass pulls water down into the soil instead of letting it run off the surface. If that grass crown you found 16 days back isn't alone, if there's more of it coming back across these paddocks, quiet, where we haven't noticed yet, those roots could be doing exactly what the papers claimed. Pulling water down instead of losing it to runoff. Feeding the water table instead of starving it. Anna felt something rise in her chest that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Not cautious, hope, not grim determination, but something closer to genuine joy. It's working, she said. Hank, it's actually working. It's early, Hank cautioned, though even his voice had lost most of its skepticism. One clump of grass. That's not a valley healed. That's not even a valley started healing, not yet. But it's... He shook his head slowly. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like this. Not this fast. Caleb had come up to join them at the wellhead, and when Anna turned to him grinning despite herself for the first time in longer than she could remember, he was watching her with an expression that made her pulse skip for an entirely different reason. You look happy, he said. Been a while since I've seen that. I feel happy, Anna admitted. Terrified and exhausted and half convinced Vane's going to find some new way to ruin all of it before the week's out. but happy underneath all that. Is that strange? Not strange, Caleb said. Earned. The word settled into her chest with unexpected warmth, and for a moment neither of them looked away. The space between them charged with something neither had named yet, but both had clearly begun to feel. Hank cleared his throat pointedly. "I'm going to go check the north paddock," he announced to no one in particular, already walking away, with the deliberate obliviousness of a man giving two young people room he suspected they needed. Anna laughed, breaking the moment, though not entirely the warmth of it. "He's not subtle." "No," Caleb agreed. "He's not." They took the discovery slow after that, not announcing it to the valley not yet, but working the system harder, watching the signs multiply across the paddocks over the following week. More green crowns scattered but growing, the well holding steady, then rising another 2 inches. Ash and the herd growing visibly stronger ribs, less prominent beneath thickening hide movements, carrying more of the natural authority Anna imagined they must have held before whatever operation had starved them half to death. It was on the 24th day, with 5 weeks narrowed down to less than 3, that Dr. Carla Jennings arrived at the ranch unannounced, her buggy rattling up the drive with a bag of veterinary equipment and an expression of open curiosity. "Mrs. Caldwell." She stepped down, extending a hand that Anna shook with some surprise. "I don't believe we've met properly. Carla Jennings. I'm a veterinary ecologist out of the Territorial College. Word travels even out here, and what I've been hearing about your operation has piqued my professional curiosity considerably." "What have you been hearing?" "That a widow bought 19 condemned bison and started grazing them in rotation across dying land, and that the land is showing signs of recovery faster than any textbook I've studied would predict." Carla's eyes were sharp, assessing clearly, a woman used to being underestimated and equally used to proving people wrong. "I'd like to see it myself if you'll allow me, and if what I find matches the rumors, I'd like to document it properly. Soil samples, root depth measurements, actual science instead of gossip passed between feed stores." Anna felt something loosen in her chest, the first outside voice in 24 days who'd arrived not to mock or threaten, but simply to look honestly at what she'd built. "I'd welcome that," she said. "More than you know." Carla spent the better part of the day walking the paddocks with Anna and Hank, kneeling in the dirt with a small trowel and glass vials taking samples, murmuring notes to herself that Anna only half understood. And by late afternoon she was sitting at Anna's kitchen table with her collected samples spread before her, her expression carrying a gravity that made Anna's stomach tighten with fresh nerves. "Well," Anna asked, unable to wait any longer, "what am I looking at?" "You're looking at soil that's recovering water retention at a rate I would not have believed possible in 24 days without documented evidence in front of me," Carla said. "The root systems in your third paddock are already pushing down 8-9 inches deeper than the samples I took from unrotated grazing land on my way in. That's not luck, Mrs. Caldwell. That's the system working exactly the way the theory predicts it should if the theory is correct, which frankly most ranchers in this territory still dismiss as academic nonsense. So it is working. It's working faster than any case study I've read," Carla said. "Which raises a question I don't have a clean answer to, yet why? Rotational grazing helps, certainly that much is established science. But this," she gestured at her samples, "this is beyond what rotation alone typically produces in under a month. There's something else contributing, your herd perhaps. Bison graze differently than cattle, more selectively, less compaction on the soil from their movement patterns. Or perhaps simply the timing, the particular composition of what native seed bank survived underground through the drought waiting for the right conditions to wake back up." "Old life waking up?" Anna murmured almost to herself. "Not new growth. Old life that never fully died." Carla looked at her with new interest. "That's a poetic way to put it, but not inaccurate." "Will it hold?" Hank asked, cutting through the science to the question that mattered most. "If Vane forces her out in 3 weeks, if this note comes due before the system's had time to prove itself fully, does any of this survive without her managing it?" Carla considered the question carefully. Soil recovery this early is fragile, she admitted. If the rotation stops, if a new owner returns to fixed grazing or overgrazes the recovered sections before the root systems fully establish, you could lose most of this progress within a single season. This isn't finished healing, Mr. Raleigh. This is a beginning, a very promising one, but a beginning, not a guarantee. The words settled over the table like a weight, and Anna felt the fragile joy of the past week tighten back into familiar dread. So everything still depends on the note, she said quietly. 3 weeks. I'm afraid the science doesn't care about banking timelines, Mrs. Caldwell, Carla said not unkindly. I wish it did. Word of Carla's visit spread through the valley faster than Anna expected, and by the following Saturday, when she made her now dreaded trip into the feed store for supplies, the atmosphere had shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. The mockery hadn't vanished entirely, but it had thinned, replaced by something more uncertain glances that held curiosity instead of pure derision, a few nods from men who'd laughed at her in this same store weeks earlier. Otis Meeker was there again, and when he saw her enter his expression carried none of its previous confidence. Heard the college sent someone out to your place, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Heard she took soil samples. She did. And Anna held his gaze steadily, remembering Hank's fury on her behalf weeks earlier, remembering exactly how much this man's mockery had cost her composure that day. And the land's recovering faster than anyone predicted, she said. Faster than a lifetime of running cattle the same way your father did ever managed to make it recover, Mr. Meeker. He had no answer for that, and the silence that followed carried a different weight than the silence that had greeted her at the auction. Not contempt, but something closer to grudging reconsideration. She was loading her wagon outside when a younger rancher approached hat in hand, hesitant in a way that reminded her faintly of Caleb's careful introduction weeks earlier. Mrs. Caldwell, name's Jonas Whitfield. My family runs the Whitfield spread out past the eastern ridge. I know it. I heard about your grass, heard it from Doc Jennings herself when she stopped through town after visiting your place. He shifted his weight, clearly nervous. My father's been running the same 40 acres bare for 3 generations, same as everybody else out here, and it's been dying faster every year since I can remember. I was wondering, I know it's forward of me to ask, but would you be willing to show me what you're doing? The paddocks, the rotation, all of it. I'm not looking to mock you, ma'am. I'm looking to learn. Anna stared at him for a moment, something unexpectedly emotional rising in her throat. You want to learn? She repeated. Yes, ma'am. 3 weeks ago, the entire valley had stood in an auction yard and laughed at her. Now, a young rancher was standing in front of her feed store wagon hat in his hands, asking to learn from the system that laughter had tried to bury before it ever had a chance to grow. Come by next week, she said. I'll show you everything. Jonas's face broke into a relieved, grateful smile, and he thanked her twice before hurrying off, and Anna stood there in the dusty street, feeling something she hadn't felt since long before Thomas died. Not just hope for her own survival, but the strange, unfamiliar sense that she might actually be changing something larger than her own small piece of the valley. She didn't see Silas Vane's buggy parked across the street until she was nearly finished loading, and when she did, she found him already watching her. His expression unreadable at the distance, but his stillness carrying a weight that made her uneasy, despite the day's small victories. He didn't approach. He simply watched for a long moment, and then turned his buggy and drove away without a word. That's not like him, Hank observed, having come up beside her in time to watch the exchange. Vane never misses a chance to needle you in person. Maybe he's saving his words for something bigger, Anna said, and the thought sat cold in her stomach the entire ride home. The bigger something arrived 3 nights later, and it did not come from Silas Vane directly, though Anna would spend the rest of her life certain his hand was somewhere behind it. She woke to ash bellowing, not the alarmed cry of the storm weeks earlier, but something lower, angrier, a sound she'd never heard from him before. And when she reached the paddock with Caleb close behind her, lantern light catching on scattered movement in the dark, she found the gate standing wide open and 3 of the herd missing. Someone opened it. Caleb said, examining the latch by lantern light, his voice tight with fury. "This didn't fail on its own, Anna. Look, the wire's been cut clean, not snapped. Somebody came out here deliberate and cut this loose." "How many are gone?" "3 near as I can count in this light. And Ash is furious. Look at him, he's trying to get past the rest of the herd to go after them himself." Anna's heart was pounding fear and rage, tangled together into something almost unbearable. 3 weeks of careful work, 3 weeks of a fragile system finally beginning to show signs of life, and now 3 animals loose in the dark in unfamiliar country, in a valley full of men who'd spent weeks calling her a fool and might not think twice about letting a stray bison wander off a cliff edge or into a rival's slaughter pen. "We have to find them," she said. "Tonight, before whoever did this decides to finish the job." They rode out within minutes, lanterns swinging following broken grass and disturbed earth in the dark. Hank arriving within the half hour after Caleb sent a rider to fetch him, and the 3 of them spent the better part of the night combing the ridgeline and the draws beyond it, calling into the darkness, listening for any sound of the missing animals. It was Ash, in the end, who found them. Anna had made the difficult decision to bring him along on a lead rope, trusting the instinct that had already proven itself twice before. And when they reached a narrow draw 2 miles from the ranch, Ash suddenly stopped ears forward and let out a low call that Anna had never heard from him, softer than his usual bellow, almost a summons. An answering call came from somewhere below in the dark. They found the 3 missing bison huddled at the bottom of the draw, spooked but unharmed, and it took the better part of an hour to coax them back up the slope, Ash's steady presence doing more to calm them than any human hand could have managed. By the time they made it back to the ranch, dawn was breaking, and Anna was so exhausted she could barely stand, but the relief of counting 19 animals back safe within the paddock fence outweighed every ache in her body. "Whoever cut that wire," Hank said grimly, examining the severed latch again in the growing light, "knew exactly what they were doing. Clean cut, no hesitation marks. That's not vandalism from some drunk kid on a dare. That's deliberate." "Vain," Anna said. "Can't prove it." Hank said the same weary refrain, though his voice carried less doubt than it had weeks earlier. "But I'd stake my ranch on it if I still had one worth staking." Caleb had been quiet through most of the search, his jaw tight with barely contained fury, and now he spoke with a heat Anna hadn't heard from him before. "We should ride into town and confront him directly. Enough with 'can't prove it.' Enough letting that man hide behind clever paperwork and clean boot prints." "And say what?" Hank asked. "Accuse him outright with nothing but a cut wire and a hunch. He'll have us up on slander before sundown, same as he threatened weeks ago. And then Anna loses the ranch for certain, instead of just risking it. So we do nothing. We do exactly what we've been doing." Anna said, her voice steadier than she felt. Exhaustion and fury burning down into something colder and more determined. "We work. We build. We prove this system beyond any doubt a court or a bank or this whole valley could raise against it. And when Vane finally makes a mistake big enough to prove, and men like that always do, eventually we'll be ready." She looked out over the paddock, over 19 bison settling into the dawn light, over Ash, standing watchful at the center of them all, and felt something harden inside her chest that hadn't been there at the auction 3 weeks earlier. Not just grief transformed into determination, but something closer to genuine resolve, forged through storms and poisoned springs and cut wires and every small cruelty a man with money and patience could throw at a woman with neither. 2 weeks, she said quietly. 2 weeks until the note comes due, and I intend to walk into that bank with proof so undeniable that even Silas Vane can't twist his way around it. She didn't yet know what shape that proof would take, or what it would cost her to get there. She didn't know that the driest month of the driest year in Cedar Fork Valley's memory was about to deliver something far more dangerous than a cut fence or a fouled spring. A single strike of lightning on dry ridge grass that had waited 14 months for exactly this kind of spark, close enough to her paddocks that no amount of careful rotation would save the herd if the wind turned wrong. But standing there in the pale light of a morning, she'd nearly lost 3 animals to watching Ash press his great head briefly against her shoulder, in a gesture that felt for the first time unmistakably like gratitude. Anna Caldwell allowed herself exactly 1 moment of quiet certainty. Whatever came next, she would not face it as the grieving, uncertain widow who'd raised her hand in that auction yard 3 weeks ago. She would face it as someone the land itself had already begun to trust. Orchestrated climactic narrative arc, voi doitwei so sec, va twist lin tip. Jonas Whitfield arrived exactly when he said he would, hat in hand, eyes wide with the particular hunger of a young man who'd spent his whole life watching his father fail at the same methods and had finally found someone willing to show him a different way. Anna walked him through the paddocks that morning, explaining the rotation schedule, the soil checks, the reasoning behind every fence line, and she found herself surprised by how much lighter the work felt with someone listening instead of mocking. 680 acres, Jonas said, shaking his head as they walked. And you've mapped every section by hand. Every section, Anna confirmed. Grass height, moisture, root depth, where I can check it. It's not complicated, Jonas. It just takes attention. Most ranchers stopped giving the land a generation ago. My father's going to want to see this himself before he believes a word of it. Then bring him, Anna said. I've got nothing to hide anymore. They were still walking the eastern paddock when Caleb rode up at a pace that told Anna something was wrong before he'd even reined in. Anna. His voice was tight, controlled in the particular way of a man forcing himself not to sound as alarmed as he felt. Riders coming up the main road, 3 of them. One's wearing a county badge. Anna's stomach dropped. The sheriff? And 2 men I don't recognize. Could be nothing. Could be Vane, Hank said, appearing from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression already hardening. The riders reached the yard within minutes, and Anna recognized the man in front immediately. Sheriff Dutton, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, who'd overseen the county for longer than Anna had been alive. And beside him, unmistakably, Silas Vane, dressed as immaculately as ever, despite the dust of the ride. Mrs. Caldwell, Sheriff Dutton said, tipping his hat, his tone carefully neutral. Afraid I've got some business to discuss with you. What kind of business? Vane answered before the sheriff could. A complaint has been filed, Mrs. Caldwell, livestock endangerment. It's come to my attention that you've been running dangerous, uncontrolled bison on land adjacent to several established grazing leases, and that these animals have already broken loose, once endangering both property and potentially lives. Anna felt fury rise so fast it nearly stole her breath. Broken loose because someone cut the wire deliberately. I have the severed latch to prove it. An unsubstantiated claim, Vane said smoothly, against a filed complaint from a concerned neighbor. Which neighbor? I'm not at liberty to say. Convenient. Sheriff Dutton cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension crackling between them. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not here to take sides. I'm here because a complaint was filed and county law requires me to inspect the operation and file a report. If everything's in order, this ends today and nobody bothers you again. And if it's not in order? Anna asked. Then the county has grounds to order the herd removed as a public safety hazard, Vane said, and Anna finally understood the full shape of what he'd engineered. Not a fence cut for its own sake. Not a poison spring for its own sake. But evidence manufactured piece by piece, building toward exactly this moment. Show me the fences, Sheriff Dutton said. The paddocks. Whatever proof you've got of proper containment. Anna led them through the property with her jaw set tight, showing the sheriff every paddock, every repaired rail, the severed latch from 3 nights earlier still sitting where Hank had left it, as evidence the improved fencing they'd built section by section over the past 3 weeks. Dutton examined everything with careful, methodical attention, and by the time they reached the final paddock, his expression had shifted from cautious neutrality into something closer to genuine respect. This is better containment than half the cattle operations in this county, he said finally. I don't see grounds for a safety order here, Mr. Vane. If anything, the cut latch supports Mrs. Caldwell's claim that someone deliberately sabotaged her operation, not the reverse. Vane's composure flickered just barely, the first genuine crack Anna had seen in 3 weeks. Sheriff, surely you understand the inherent danger of... I understand what I'm looking at, Dutton said, cutting him off with the flat authority of a man who'd made his decision. And what I'm looking at is a well-managed operation, not a hazard. I'll file my report accordingly. This matter's closed." He tipped his hat to Anna. "Sorry for the trouble, ma'am. Good work out here from what I can see." He turned his horse and rode off without another word, leaving Vane standing in the yard with his jaw tight, his careful mask slipping for just long enough that Anna could see clearly the fury underneath. "You're not going to win this," he said quietly, once the sheriff was out of earshot. "Whatever you think you've proven today, Mrs. Caldwell, the note still comes due in 2 weeks. And I have considerably more patience for finding new complaints than you have time left to answer them." "Then find another one," Anna said. "I'll be ready for it." Vane studied her for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes, and then he mounted his own horse and rode away without another word, and Anna understood watching him go that whatever came next would not be as easily defeated as a sheriff's inspection. Mom, the heat that settled over Cedar Fork Valley in the days that followed was unlike anything Anna had experienced even in 14 months of relentless drought, a stillness in the air that felt almost predatory. The sky bleached white by afternoon, the wind when it came at all, carrying a dry electric quality that made the hair on her arms stand up for no reason she could name. Storms building somewhere. Hank said, studying the horizon on the morning of the 29th day, his weathered face creased with something Anna hadn't seen from him before genuine unease. "Can feel it in the air. Pressure's dropping." "Rain?" Anna asked, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "Maybe, or maybe just more of what we got 3 weeks back. Dry lightning, no rain behind it." He looked toward the ridgeline east of the property, where the grass stood tallest and driest months of drought, turning it into something closer to kindling than pasture. "If it's the second kind, and it strikes anywhere near that ridge, we've got a problem bigger than any banknote." "How big?" "Big enough that I want every water barrel on this property filled and staged before nightfall," Hank said. "Just in case." They spent the day preparing anyway, moving the herd to the paddock furthest from the ridge, staging water and shovels near the house, and Anna tried to tell herself it was simple caution, nothing more. Even as the strange electric stillness in the air grew heavier with each passing hour. The lightning came just after midnight. Anna woke to a flash so bright it lit the inside of her bedroom, like daylight followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that rattled the window panes, and she was out of bed before the sound had fully faded. Some instinct older than conscious thought already screaming at her that this storm was different from the last one. She smelled the smoke before she reached the door. Fire. She screamed it into the dark, running for the yard, and found Caleb already outside, staring toward the eastern ridge where an orange glow was spreading across the horizon with a speed that stole the breath from her chest. "Caleb, the ridge." "I see it." His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Lightning must have struck dry grass up top. Wind's coming from the east. Anna, it's coming straight for the paddocks." "How much time do we have?" "Not much. Fire moves fast in grass this dry, especially with wind behind it." He was already running for the barn, for horses, for anything that might help. "We need to move the herd now, away from the ridge, away from anything that'll burn." Hank arrived within minutes, drawn by the glow visible even from his own property a mile off, and the three of them worked with a desperate, coordinated speed, born of 3 weeks of learning to trust each other completely. "Open the paddock gates," Anna ordered. "All of them give the herd the whole property to run if they need to. Don't pen them anywhere. The fire could trap them." "Anna, if we open every gate, we could lose them scattered across 600 acres. "Better scattered than burned alive, Hank." He didn't argue further. They worked fast, throwing gates wide, and the herd, already spooked by the thunder and the growing orange glow on the horizon, needed no further encouragement to move. 19 shapes streamed out into the dark pasture, and Anna's heart clenched as she realized, counting frantically in the firelight, that she could only see 18. "Ash," she said, her voice breaking. "Where's Ash?" He was at the back of the herd a moment ago. Caleb's voice cut off as another flash of lightning illuminated the eastern paddock, and in that brief flash Anna saw him, Ash, standing not with the fleeing herd, but turned back toward the fence line, toward the direction of the fire, unmoving. "He's not running." Anna said, disbelief and terror warring in her chest. Why isn't he running? I don't know, but we don't have time to find out. Hank said, already moving toward his horse. The fire's going to reach that eastern fence line inside 20 minutes, maybe less with this wind. I'm going after him. Anna, no. I'm not losing him, Hank. Not after everything he's done for this herd, for this land. I am not standing here and watching him burn. She was on her horse before either man could stop her, spurring toward the eastern paddock with the smell of smoke growing thicker with every stride, the orange glow on the ridge now visible as actual flame, climbing the dry grass with terrifying speed, close enough that she could hear it now. A low, roaring hiss, like something alive and hungry. Anna, wait! Caleb's voice came from behind her, and she heard the hoofbeats of his own horse closing the distance. You are not doing this alone. She didn't slow down to argue. The fire was close now, close enough that the heat of it pressed against her face, even at this distance close enough that ash was beginning to fall like grim black snow across the paddock, and through the smoke and the flickering orange light, she could finally see why Ash hadn't run. 3 of the herd's younger animals' calves, born sometime in the past year, before their mothers had been condemned to slaughter too small and too frightened to have kept pace with the fleeing herd, were trapped against the fence line, and Ash had turned back to shield them, his massive body positioned between the terrified calves and the advancing wall of flame. He went back for them. Anna breathed her heart in her throat. He went back for the calves. We have to get them out now, Caleb said, already dismounting, moving toward the trapped animals. Despite the searing heat, despite the smoke thickening around them with every passing second. Anna, the gate on the far side. It's still latched. They're trapped in the corner. Anna threw herself off her horse and ran for the gate, her hands shaking so badly she nearly couldn't work the latch, smoke burning in her throat. The roar of the approaching fire now a physical pressure against her eardrums. Come on, she gasped, wrenching the latch free. Come on, come on. The gate swung open, and Caleb was already driving the terrified calves through it, shouting, waving his arms, and Ash held his position at the fence line. Even as the fire crept closer. Close enough now that Anna could see individual flames leaping along the dry grass, barely 50 yards away, close enough that the heat had become genuinely dangerous, searing against exposed skin. Ash! Anna screamed his name into the smoke and the roar. Ash, they're clear. Come on. You have to move now. For one terrible suspended second, the bull didn't move, still holding his position as though his instinct to shield the calves overrode every survival impulse he possessed, and Anna felt something in her chest tear open with pure terror. Ash! He turned. He moved toward her at last, and Anna grabbed for the lead rope she'd looped over her saddle horn, but before she could reach him fully, a gust of wind. Sudden violent, carrying the fire itself forward in a leaping wall of orange that seemed to jump 20 feet in an instant, cut off the path back toward the open gate entirely. Anna, get back. Caleb's voice was raw with terror. Now, real terror, the kind that stripped away every careful, controlled thing about him. The wind's turned. We're cut off from the gate. There has to be another way out. There isn't time to find one. Smoke had turned the world into a blinding, choking gray-orange chaos, and Anna felt genuine panic clawing up her throat for the first time since this entire ordeal began. Felt the very real possibility that she might not survive this decision she'd made to ride back into a burning field for an animal. Felt Caleb's hand close hard around her arm as he tried to pull her toward what he judged to be the safest remaining path. It was Ash who found the way. He pushed past both of them, moving with sudden, decisive purpose, and where Anna expected him to bolt in blind panic. He instead turned along the fence line, following it at a pace just fast enough for them to keep up on foot, tracing a path that ran parallel to the flame, rather than directly away from it, toward a low section of fence. Anna vaguely remembered as unfinished a gap they'd meant to close the following week and hadn't yet gotten to. He's leading us to the gap. She realized, disbelief cutting through her terror. Caleb, he knows exactly where the weak fence line is. Then follow him. They ran, smoke burning in their lungs, heat pressing against their backs like a living thing. And Ash reached the unfinished section of fence and simply pushed through it, splintering the half-built rail with his own weight. clearing a path wide enough for Anna and Caleb to scramble through behind him into the open pasture beyond, away from the fire's reach, gasping, coughing, alive, coughing. Anna collapsed to her knees in the dirt, her lungs burning, her hands scraped raw, and looked back at the wall of flame now consuming the paddock they'd just escaped, and felt a sob tear loose from her chest that she couldn't have stopped if she tried. "We're alive," Caleb said, dropping down beside her, his own voice shaking. "Anna, we're alive." The calves made it through the main gate before we even reached Ash. Hank's got them. I saw him gathering the herd further out before we lost sight of everything in the smoke. Ash stood over them both, breathing hard, his dark hide streaked with soot, and when Anna finally looked up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that felt impossibly like relief. "You went back for them," she said, her voice breaking. "You went back for babies that weren't even yours to protect." He lowered his great head and pressed it gently against her shoulder, the same gesture from weeks earlier, but heavier now, weighted with everything they'd both just survived. "Thank you," Anna whispered into his rough hide. "Thank you for coming back for me too." They spent the rest of the night fighting the fire's edge alongside every neighbor who arrived once the glow became visible across the valley. Hank organizing a bucket line from the nearest water source. Jonas Whitfield arriving with his own father in tow. Even Otis Meeker showing up before dawn with a wagon of shovels. None of them speaking of old mockery, all of them working with the singular desperate focus of people who understood that fire in a drought-stricken valley didn't care whose land it started on. By the time the sun rose, the fire had burned itself out against the natural fire break of the recovering paddocks, the rotated rested sections of grass too green and too moist to carry flame, the way the untouched ridge grass had, a fact Hank pointed out, with something like awe, as they surveyed the damage in the pale morning light. "Look at that," he said, gesturing toward the clear line where scorched earth gave way abruptly to intact green-tinged pasture. "Fire hit your recovered paddocks and just stopped. Couldn't find enough dry fuel to keep burning." "The system worked," Anna said, disbelief and exhaustion warring in her voice. "Even against fire it worked." "Saved more than your herd last night," Hank said quietly. "That fire was moving toward the Whitfield spread too before your paddocks broke its path. Saved half this valley's grazing land, whether anyone up there wants to admit that yet or not." Jonas, standing nearby with soot streaking his face, looked between Anna and the burn line with something like awe. "My father saw that," he said. "He watched the fire die out right at your fence line. He's not going to be able to argue with that no matter how stubborn he is." Anna looked out over the scorched eastern ridge over the paddocks that had held their ground against fire itself, over Ash, standing exhausted but alive among a herd that owed him, and by extension, her everything, and felt something settle in her chest that hadn't been there since before Thomas died. Not just hope, but something closer to certainty. Silas Vane arrived just past dawn, his buggy pulling up at the edge of the burned ground, and when he stepped down to survey the damage, his expression carried none of its usual careful composure, something raw and calculating. Instead, a man watching a plan unravel faster than he'd accounted for. "Mrs. Caldwell," his voice was tight, "I trust you're unharmed. No thanks to whoever might have known that ridgeline was dry enough to catch," Anna said, watching his face carefully for any reaction. "Lightning strikes are an act of providence, Mrs. Caldwell, not a man's doing." But something in his eyes flickered just slightly, and Anna felt the same cold certainty she'd felt weeks earlier at the poisoned spring, that whatever role Providence had played last night, this man's hand had been somewhere in the mix, whether in starting the danger or simply hoping it would finish what his other efforts hadn't. "The fire stopped at my fence line," Anna said, "right where the recovered paddocks begin. The whole valley saw it, Mr. Vane. Sheriff Dutton's already been notified, and I imagine he'll want to know exactly how a lightning strike managed to ignite ridgegrass on land that happens to run parallel to a boundary dispute you filed against me not 2 weeks ago." Vane's jaw tightened. "That is an absurd insinuation." "Is it?" Hank stepped forward, his voice hard as flint. "Because from where I'm standing, Mr. Vane, this is the third incident in a month that's happened to threaten this ranch right when you happen to be looking for an excuse to call the note. Poisoned spring. Cut fence. Now a fire that started on a ridge with awfully convenient timing. You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part, Vane said, his composure cracking further with every word, his voice rising, in a way Anna had never heard from him before. None. And if you continue spreading these accusations publicly, I will have grounds for a defamation suit that will cost you this ranch far faster than any note ever could. Then sue me, Anna said, stepping forward, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion and soot and raw fear still coursing through her body. Sue me in front of a judge, in front of this whole valley, and let's see how well your careful arithmetic holds up once people start asking the same questions I'm asking. Because I think you're starting to understand something, Mr. Vane. I think you're starting to understand that no matter what you throw at this land poison sabotage fire, it keeps surviving, and so do I. The valley had gone quiet around them. Ranchers and neighbors who'd spent the night fighting fire side by side, now watching this confrontation with the rapt attention of people witnessing something they'd remember for years. Vane looked around at the gathered faces, Hank's fury, Jonas's wide-eyed attention, even Otis Meeker's grudging silence, and seemed to calculate in real time the cost of pushing further in front of this particular audience. 10 days, he said finally, his voice flat, stripped of its usual charm. The note comes due in 10 days, Mrs. Caldwell, precisely as agreed. I will not extend it, and I will not apologize for events beyond my control. But I will say this. His eyes swept over the burned ridge, over the sharp, undeniable line, where fire had died against recovered ground. I did not expect this land to fight back quite so hard. He returned to his buggy without another word, and this time, when he drove away, Anna did not feel fear watching him go. She felt something closer to grim, exhausted triumph. 10 days, Hank said quietly, coming to stand beside her. You really think you can have the money by then? Anna looked out over her land, scorched in places, recovering in others alive, despite everything a cruel season and a crueler man had thrown against it, and felt the weight of the question settle into her chest. I don't know, she admitted. But I know this valley just watched dying land stop a wildfire with nothing but roots and rest. If that's not enough to convince people this system is worth investing in, worth lending against, worth believing in, then I don't know what would be. Caleb, standing nearby with soot still streaked across his face, looked at her with an expression that held more than simple admiration. Now something deeper, something that had been building quietly across weeks of shared exhaustion and shared purpose and shared fear in the dark of a burning field. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I believe in it, and I believe in you. Even. Anna met his eyes, and for a moment, standing in the wreckage of a night that had nearly killed them both. Something passed between them that neither one reached to name. Not yet, not with 10 days and a banknote still hanging over everything, but real nonetheless, undeniable as the green line of recovered grass cutting clean through a field of ash. 10 days, she repeated, turning back toward the herd, toward ash, standing protective at its center, toward the long, uncertain work still ahead of her. Then, let's make every single one of them count. Anna spent the first of the 10 remaining days doing something she hadn't done since Thomas died. She sat down at his old desk, pulled out every ledger, every scrap of correspondence, every contact her husband had ever kept, and began writing letters. Who are you writing to? Hank asked. Finding her hunched over the desk well past midnight, a stack of finished envelopes already growing at her elbow. Everyone, Anna said, not looking up. The territorial college where Carla teaches, the agricultural bureau in the capital. Every rancher within 50 miles who might have money to invest, and enough sense to recognize proof when they see it stopped a wildfire cold. You think anyone's going to ride out here on 10 days' notice? I think people ride a lot faster when they smell opportunity instead of charity, Anna said. I'm not asking for pity, Hank. I'm offering proof. A working system documented by an actual scientist that just saved half this valley's grazing land from burning to the ground. That's not a fool's errand anymore. That's an investment. Hank picked up one of the sealed letters, turning it over in his hands, something like pride settling into the tired lines of his face. Your husband would have been terrible at this, he said. Thomas was a good man, but he never had your nerve for asking people directly for what he needed. Always waited for things to come to him. Well, I don't have time to wait, Anna said. I've got 10 days. The replies started coming in on the third day, and each one arrived like a small, desperate victory. The first was from the Territorial College itself, not from Carla directly, but from the department head she reported to a man named Professor Aldous Grimm, expressing what he called considerable professional interest in the documented soil recovery rates Carla had already forwarded in her own reports, and requesting permission to visit the site personally before the week's end. He wants to see it himself, Anna said, reading the letter aloud to Hank and Caleb over a hurried breakfast. Says if the recovery holds up to scrutiny, the college has research funds specifically earmarked for demonstrating sustainable grazing methods to skeptical ranching communities. Research funds, Hank repeated slowly. You're talking about the college actually paying to be involved in this. I'm talking about exactly that. The second reply came from a rancher 3 counties over, a man Anna had never met, but who'd apparently heard about the wildfire story through channels she couldn't begin to trace, expressing interest in purchasing breeding stock from her herd. Once it had recovered fully, an offer that, while premature, represented the first time anyone outside Cedar Fork Valley had looked at her bison and seen value instead of a lost cause. But it was the third letter arriving on the 5th day that made Anna's hands shake as she read it. It's from the Agricultural Bureau, she said, her voice unsteady. They're offering a conditional loan, low interest, backed by the territorial government specifically for ranchers implementing documented sustainable grazing practices. She looked up at Hank, disbelief and hope warring across her face. Hank, this could cover the entire note, more than cover it. Conditional how? They want an inspector out here first, someone from the Bureau to verify the claims independently before they release any funds. Anna's excitement dimmed slightly as she read further. And their earliest inspector availability is... She checked the letter again, her stomach dropping. 8 days from now. That's after your note comes due, Hank said grimly. By 1 day. By one day. Anna set the letter down, her hands pressing flat against the desk to steady herself. 1 single day, standing between salvation and losing everything. Caleb, who'd been quiet through the exchange, finally spoke. Then we ask Vane for 1 day's grace. He won't give it, Anna said. You've seen how he operates. He'll smell weakness in the request before I've even finished asking. Then we don't ask like it's weakness, Caleb said. We ask like it's an inevitability he'd be a fool to interrupt. One day, Anna, standing between him collecting a debt and watching a fully funded government-backed operation succeed right under his nose. If he refuses and word gets out that a man refused 1 single day of grace to a woman who single-handedly stopped a wildfire, that's not going to make him look shrewd. That's going to make him look exactly like the villain half this valley already suspects him to be. Anna considered this, turning it over in her mind, and felt something steady settle into her chest. You're right, she said. He cares more about his reputation in this valley than he lets on. Every threat he's made has been careful deniable, never quite crossing into something that would make him look like the villain outright. She stood smoothing her dress with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Let's go remind him exactly how much that reputation is worth to him. They found Vane at the bank as expected, and Anna didn't bother with pleasantries this time, walking directly into his office with the Agricultural Bureau's letter in hand. 1 day, she said, setting the letter on his desk. That's all I'm asking. The note comes due in 8 days. The Bureau's inspector arrives on the 9th. 1 day of grace, and if their inspection confirms what my own herd and Dr. Jennings's documented findings already show, you'll have your money in full, likely with enough left to make this whole ordeal worth your while. Vane read the letter slowly, his expression carefully neutral, though Anna could see the calculation working behind his eyes. And if the inspection doesn't confirm your claims, if this is simply another delay tactic dressed up in official letterhead, then you foreclose 1 day later than planned, and you lose nothing, Anna said. But if you refuse this request, Mr. Vane, and word travels through this valley, as word always does, that you denied a single day's grace to a widow with a government inspection already scheduled, backed by an actual agricultural bureau, backed by a college professor's own written interest." She let the sentence trail off deliberately. "I don't think that story does much for your standing in this county. Especially not after everyone watched my land stop a wildfire that started rather conveniently on a ridge bordering property you've been trying to acquire for over a month." The insinuation hung in the air between them, sharp and deliberate, and for the first time since the auction, Anna watched something in Silas Vane's composure genuinely falter. "You're threatening my reputation," he said quietly. "I'm simply pointing out that reputations once damaged in a small county like this tend to stay damaged," Anna said. "Same as land if you work it wrong long enough. One day, Mr. Vane, that's all I'm asking. The choice is entirely yours." The silence stretched long enough that Anna began to wonder if she'd overplayed her hand, if his pride would win out over his caution, and he'd refuse simply to prove he couldn't be maneuvered. "One day," he finally said, his voice tight. "The note comes due in 8 days as scheduled. If the Bureau's inspection has not concluded and funds have not been transferred by the close of business, the following day I will foreclose without further delay or discussion. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear." "Good." He slid the letter back across the desk toward her. "I do hope for your sake that your remarkable herd continues its remarkable performance. Because if it doesn't, Mrs. Caldwell, I promise you, I will show considerably less patience going forward than I have shown thus far." Anna took the letter, folded it carefully, and met his eyes without flinching. "It will," she said, and left his office without another word. Professor Grimm arrived on the 6th day, a thin, precise man with wire spectacles and a notebook. He seemed to consult more often than he spoke, and he spent the better part of 2 days walking the property alongside Carla Jennings, taking his own measurements, cross-referencing his own samples against her earlier findings, asking Anna a barrage of questions about every decision she'd made from the auction forward. "You had no formal training in any of this," he said on the second evening, sitting at Anna's kitchen table with pages of notes spread before him. "No agricultural degree, no prior grazing management experience beyond running a modest herd of cattle with your late husband." "I had papers my cousin sent me," Anna said. "And I had land that was dying, and animals nobody else wanted, and 11 weeks to prove something before I lost everything. I suppose desperation makes for a fairly motivated education." Grimm allowed himself a small, dry smile. "An understatement, Mrs. Caldwell, if the results in front of me are accurate. In 20 years of studying grazing recovery, I have documented perhaps 3 cases of soil restoration at anything close to this rate, and every one of those took place under carefully controlled research conditions, not improvised by a widow with a torn ledger page and a herd of condemned bison." "Does that mean the Bureau will fund it?" Anna asked, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "It means I intend to recommend it in the strongest possible terms," Grimm said. "Whether the Bureau's own inspector reaches the same conclusion when he arrives is of course a separate matter. But between my findings and Dr. Jennings's earlier documentation, I would be very surprised if he found anything to contradict what's plainly visible on this land." The Bureau's inspector, a weathered field agent named Mr. Sorensen, arrived on the appointed 9th day, the exact day Vane's original note had come. Due the single day of grace now stretched thin and taut over everything Anna had built. Sorensen was less effusive than Grimm, a practical man who spoke little and observed much, walking the paddocks in near silence for the better part of a morning, kneeling in the dirt exactly as Anna had done weeks earlier, checking root depth with his own hands. "Mrs. Caldwell," he finally said, standing and brushing dirt from his knees. "I've inspected 11 grazing operations across this territory in the past 2 years, claiming similar results. Most were exaggerating. Some were outright fraudulent." Anna's stomach tightened. "And mine. Yours is the first I've seen where the claims actually undersold the results," Sorensen said. "I'll have my recommendation to the Bureau by wire this afternoon." Given the wildfire documentation alone, a working fire break, created entirely through grazing rotation, verified by county sheriff's report, I don't anticipate any difficulty securing approval. Anna felt her knees nearly give out with relief, and Hank standing beside her caught her elbow to steady her. How long? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Once you wire your recommendation, how long until the funds actually transfer? Sorensen checked his pocket watch, calculating. If I wire this afternoon and the Bureau processes as quickly as these things typically move for high-priority recommendations, funds could transfer by tomorrow morning. Possibly this evening, if the telegraph office cooperates and the bank's willing to accept a Bureau-guaranteed wire in advance of formal documentation. That's within the grace period, Hank said, doing his own quick math. That's inside Vane's deadline barely, but inside it. Sorensen tipped his hat toward Anna. I'll get my wire sent within the hour, Mrs. Caldwell. For what it's worth, in 2 years of this work, I don't believe I've seen anything quite like what you've built out here. This isn't just a successful operation. This is a demonstration the whole territory is going to be studying for years. He rode out within the hour, exactly as promised, and Anna spent the remaining hours of that day in a state of suspended, agonizing hope, pacing between the house and the paddocks, unable to settle into any single task, watching the road for any sign of a returning rider with news. The wire came just past sunset, carried by a breathless young telegraph clerk who'd ridden out from town at a gallop, and Anna's hands shook so badly reading it that Caleb had to steady the paper for her. Bureau confirms conditional loan approved in full. She read aloud, her voice cracking on every other word. Funds transferred to Cedar Fork County Bank, effective immediate telegraph confirmation, pending standard documentation, to follow by post. She looked up at Hank and Caleb, both of them watching her with expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning joy. It's approved, she said. Hank, it's actually approved. The full amount. Hank let out a whoop that Anna had never once heard from the steady, careful man in all the years she'd known him, and Caleb swept her up into an embrace so sudden and so full of relief that Anna found herself laughing and crying at the same time, clinging to him with the particular desperation of someone who'd been holding her breath for 11 weeks and could finally let it out. We did it, she said into his shoulder. Caleb, we actually did it. You did it? He corrected, gently pulling back just enough to look at her, his hands still resting warm against her arms. Every impossible piece of this, Anna. The fence, the spring, the fire, the note you fought, every single one of them, and you won. She looked up at him, and the moment stretched between them, charged with everything neither of them had said aloud across 11 weeks of shared exhaustion and shared danger and shared growing tenderness. And this time, neither of them pulled away. He kissed her gently, carefully, like a man who'd wanted to for weeks, and had finally run out of reasons to hold himself back. And Anna kissed him back with a relief that went far beyond the banknote, beyond the herd, beyond even the land itself, the relief of a woman who'd buried her husband, believing she might never again let herself want anything, only to find herself standing in the dark with someone who'd chosen again and again to stay. Hank cleared his throat loudly, though there was no missing the grin tugging at his weathered face. I'll just go tell the herd the good news myself, he said, already walking toward the paddock with exaggerated tact, leaving them to their moment. They rode into town the following morning, the wire confirmation in hand, and found Silas Vane waiting at the bank exactly where Anna had known he would be, his expression carefully composed, despite what must have already reached him through whatever channels kept him informed of every development in the county. Mrs. Caldwell. His voice was flat, controlled. I understand congratulations are in order. You understand correctly. Anna set the wire confirmation on his desk with a hand that no longer shook. Full payment guaranteed by the Territorial Agricultural Bureau, transferred as of last evening. I believe that satisfies the terms of our agreement with a day to spare. Vane read the confirmation slowly, and Anna watched every careful assumption he'd built across 11 weeks crumble in real time behind his composed expression. The Bureau doesn't typically fund individual ranching operations, he said almost to himself, especially not this quickly. They do when the operation just stopped a wildfire cold, and demonstrated soil recovery rates. Their own department head called unprecedented. Anna said, "Turns out dying land isn't such a foolish investment after all, Mr. Vane. Turns out it just needed someone willing to actually listen to it, instead of grinding it down the same way for 30 years and calling that tradition." Vane set the letter down, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Something unreadable working behind his carefully composed expression. "I underestimated you," he finally said, and Anna heard for the first time in 11 weeks something that sounded almost like genuine acknowledgement rather than calculated charm. "I confess, Mrs. Caldwell, when you raised your hand at that auction, I assumed I was watching a grieving widow make a decision she'd regret within the month. I did not anticipate this." "Most people didn't," Anna said. "That was rather the point." "The note is satisfied," Vane said, formal again, though something in his voice had lost its usual edge. "The ranch is yours, free of the bank's claim, effective immediately. I trust I won't need to trouble you further." "I trust you won't," Anna said. "Though I'd think carefully before troubling any other widow in this valley the way you tried to trouble me, Mr. Vane. This county's starting to pay closer attention than you might prefer." She left the bank with Hank and Caleb at her sides and didn't look back to see whatever expression Silas Vane wore once the door closed behind her. She didn't need to. For the first time in 11 weeks, she felt no fear of him at all. The rain finally came 9 days later. Not the dry, promising thunder of the storms before it, but real soaking rain that fell steady through an entire afternoon and into the night, and Anna stood on her porch, watching it fall with tears streaming freely down her face. Unashamed, unhidden 14 months of drought finally breaking over land that had proven it could survive without the rain's mercy, but had never stopped waiting for it all the same. The valley gathered at the Caldwell Ranch 3 weeks after that, an impromptu celebration that started with Jonas Whitfield and his now humbled father arriving to formally request Anna's guidance in converting their own grazing operation, and grew over the following hours into something Anna could never have imagined standing in that auction yard 11 weeks earlier. Otis Meeker came hat in hand and offered an apology so awkward and so genuine that Anna found herself laughing rather than holding on to old resentment. Even Hank's oldest rival ranchers came curious, despite themselves walking the recovered paddocks with expressions of open wonder at grass growing thick and green where cracked earth had stood for over a year. "Look at all this," Hank said, standing beside Anna as they watched the gathering spread across the yard, watched neighbors who'd mocked her 11 weeks ago now asking earnest questions about root depth and rotation schedules. "Never thought I'd see the day this whole valley showed up asking a woman for grazing advice." "Neither did I," Anna admitted. "I just wanted to save 19 animals nobody else wanted. I didn't know it would turn into all this." "That's usually how the biggest things happen," Hank said. "You set out to save what's right in front of you, and somewhere along the way, you end up saving more than you ever intended." Ash stood at the fence line watching the gathered crowd with the same steady, watchful patience he'd carried since the day Anna first saw him in that condemned pen, and when she walked over to him resting her hand against his broad neck, he pressed his head against her shoulder in the gesture she'd come to understand as something between trust and gratitude. "We did it," she told him quietly. "Every bit of it. The fence, the fire, the note, all of it together." Caleb found her there a few minutes later, and this time when he took her hand, there was nothing tentative about it. No hesitation, no careful distance. Just two people who'd fought through fire and sabotage and grief together and come out the other side, choosing each other without reservation. "Marry me," he said, simple and direct, the way he'd introduced himself in that auction yard 11 weeks earlier. No calculation, no angle. Just a plain statement offered like a fact rather than a request. "I know it's fast. I know Thomas isn't so long gone that anyone in this valley would blame you for waiting. But I've spent 11 weeks watching you rebuild something everyone said was dead, and I don't want to spend one more day pretending I don't want to build the rest of my life right alongside you." Anna looked at him, at the sincerity plain in his sun-browned face, and felt something in her chest that she'd been afraid since Thomas's funeral she might never feel again. Not the desperate need to survive, but the simple, uncomplicated wish to build something forward, instead of merely holding on to what remained. "Yes," she said, and the word came without hesitation, without doubt, steady as everything else she'd fought for across these 11 impossible weeks. "Yes, Caleb Doss, I'll marry you." The valley celebrated around them, unaware for the moment of what had just been decided at the fence line. And Anna stood there with Caleb's hand in hers, and Ash's steady presence at her side, and thought of the woman who'd raised her hand at that auction 11 weeks earlier, grieving and desperate, and certain of nothing, except that she couldn't let those 19 animals die. That woman could never have imagined this. The rain finally falling, the valley finally believing a man who'd chosen her, not despite her grief, but because of the strength grief had forged in her, and a herd of once condemned bison standing now as the very foundation of everything she'd rebuilt. Silas Vane never troubled her again. Word reached her months later that he'd sold his remaining grazing leases and left the county entirely unable to hold his ground in a valley that had watched firsthand exactly what kind of woman he'd underestimated. The land kept healing, season after season, paddock by paddock. The rotation system Anna had built from grief and desperation, and a handful of borrowed college papers, becoming within 2 years the standard practice across half the ranches in Cedar Fork Valley. Jonas Whitfield's operation flourished under the same methods. Even Otis Meeker grudgingly began rotating his own herds, muttering all the while that he'd have figured it out eventually on his own. Ash lived out his years as the undisputed patriarch of a herd that had grown through careful breeding and careful stewardship into one of the most respected bison operations in the territory, sought after, not for slaughter, but for breeding stock, for demonstration, for the simple, undeniable proof that dying land could remember, given patience and the right kind of care, exactly how to live again. And Anna Caldwell, who had once stood alone in an auction yard while an entire county laughed at her grief-fueled decision, stood instead years later at the center of a valley that had learned to trust her judgment before its own tradition. A widow, no longer a rancher, respected, rather than mocked a woman who had walked into fire itself, rather than abandoned what she'd chosen to save. The land had not simply survived. It had remembered how to thrive exactly as she'd promised it would that first desperate morning at the fence line. And so had she.